What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Behind the Door podcast. Thanks for rocking with us. Thanks for tuning in, being on this journey with us in the prison door and the amazing guests that we have. Always a big thank you to Jeremy, my co-host, my confidant, my right-hand man, the always slim and always sexy Jeremy Hiltz. Big shout out to you, and big shout out to a good friend of mine, a good colleague of ours, Ali. Ali's here to talk about juvenile justice with us today. And I think we'll start off, Ali, just introduce yourself and just for everybody listening, what brings you to the podcast today?
Thank you, Brandon, for having me, and Jeremy as well. My name is Ali. I go with he, him pronouns. What brings me to the podcast today is the work of Maine Youth Justice, a campaign that we've been running for the past 4 years to close down the last juvenile facility in the state of Maine. We've made a lot of progress, but I think formally another reason why you guys brought me here, because I was previously incarcerated at the juvenile facility, as well as in state custody as an adult, as well as a federal and immigration. But through hard work, resilience, and a lot of community help and just partners just sticking loyal and working hard, I think made it out, and that's where we're at.
Absolutely, man. It's important too to highlight that even before we jump into it, that you've had experience with the systems that we're talking about on multiple levels, and I think you're probably the first guest that we've had on the podcast, the first person that we've talked to that's experienced the different dimensions and dynamics of the system, all the way from youth incarceration to dealing with immigration holds and everything in between. So I think that's a really important part of your story, and I think the beautiful thing having you here today, Ali, to talk about Maine youth justice work and the work to end youth incarceration in Maine and hopefully influence a movement to end youth incarceration nationally, is a really huge topic that we've been exploring, because from the very beginning of this podcast, getting into, Jeremy and myself and our stories, one of the things that's always resonated, I think, with people who are listening is Jeremy talking about his experience as a young person encountering the system, quite a few years ago, and then making that gradual change into entering the adult system. And I think just starting off today, before we get into the work of Maine Youth Justice and some of Ali's perspective, Jeremy, why do you think it's important to end youth incarceration, everywhere, but specifically in the state of Maine?
Well, does it serve a purpose for the kids that are incarcerated there? It doesn't help. It doesn't advance anybody's life in any kind of meaningful way. So it doesn't really have a place in our society or our state.
Yeah,
I do want to just say this though, is that when Ali was introducing himself, I first saw Ali because I found out about the work you were doing, Maine Inside Out, a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who don't know, they were doing theater, right? Performances. Did you meet Maine Inside Out while you were at Long Creek?
Yeah, I actually did. So while I was incarcerated, I went in at 17. Well, actually, after in and out years of being in and out on probation, and then I got my 18-month full sentence at the age of 17. By 18, roughly, they came in and were trying to create a new program that kind of shared our stories through theater, and we were obviously amateurs at acting, but the way they talked us into it was pretty much they gave us food and let us out of the unit, so it was a great opportunity for us to just be able to just share some stories, and months later, that's what we got our first opportunity to come off grounds to do our first performance.
I think it was Joe Jackson, we're doing this, and I went to it, and I never heard of it before, and the first time I saw Ali, I was like listening to his performance and what they were doing, and I was like moved to tears for probably 40 minutes, and just reliving like everything that, like, I don't know, just the opportunity, like what these kids were doing in that moment, to tell their stories and stuff like that. I never had that. You know what I mean? I was just sitting there going, man, somebody cares enough about these kids, and these kids are reacting to it in a positive way. And I just thought it was like the most touching thing. And I started, and then I was watching them for a long time now. I just thought that was you should have that on your resume. You're a pretty talented kid. You know what I'm saying? You're pretty talented, man. Yeah, but you and everybody, you know what I mean? There was a group of really talented kids there, and I've been excited to see what you've done since then.
Yeah, it gave us an open door, man, to a platform that we never expected, that we, where society can look at us and actually care. Like, wait, we were so confused after the first performance, and 500 people like sold out tickets, and they came up, they stood up with, and clapped. Like, it was a shocking experience. And mind you, we were incarcerated, so we don't know what the streets look like. We don't know what cars look like, the new cars with no new phones.
So I had a kind of a similar experience, is that when I was in the youth center, they gave me, because it was like a credit system, and I think I had 120 credits to do. And they said, if you do this commercial on TV, we'll give you 60 credits off your sentence. I said, okay, no problem. So I'm in. And they did it they were building Long Creek at the time. And they were there.
Yeah,
I was in the youth center, and then they did that, and then they had this anti-violence campaign, and I was on this basketball court. He said, and I was, you know what I mean? Like, we faked a fight with the orange jumpsuit on and stuff, playing basketball, and then they showed it at One City Center in Portland. They brought me down there to show the thing, and I was like, oh, these people show up. You know what I mean? Like, oh, because I was incarcerated too, so I know that feeling. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's something huge to unpack too. Just thinking about like that feeling of being inside as a young person and being incarcerated, and then that anxiety of like, oh my God, people are going to see something that I'm a part of. How are they going to react? Because you know what the stories floating around about you are, and so that hesitation or that anxiety is important. But I do want to, before we jump in, highlight what Jeremy said too. Like, Ali is an incredibly talented artist, right? An amazing poet. And real quick, before we get into anything, plug your social media so people can find out about your poetry and stuff. So tell them where they can follow you at.
Appreciate it. So if you guys want to check out some of my released poems, professionally released poems, you can go on Humble Poetry Ali on Instagram, Humble Poetry Ali. My regular Instagram page, where I just do a lot of my social activism and whatever I release, whether it's interviews or, any type of information that we can provide for the community, it's Humble Philosopher Ali. And I made that name a long time ago. I'm not that humble. I'm just kidding. Humble Philosopher Ali. Nah, just kidding.
So yeah, if everybody who's listening and watching, check out some of Ali's poetry and take a look at some of his activism too, because it's really high level stuff. And I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. Do you have a poem memorized that you could recite for us to give the people a little bit of a preview of what you're doing out here with the arts?
I can. I'll try to make a quick one. Yeah, I have a bunch. Thank you for putting me on the spot like that. I wish you had told me. Okay, yeah. So this is about being quarantined. It's called carceral humanism, and how everybody was kind of incarcerated during the time of COVID, and how does it feel to be incarcerated in your home, or like this is our reality, right? Being incarcerated inside or outside in the real world. So it says, as I'm sitting here quarantined, I use it to my advantage. Confused times, but there has been no damage. A relieved sigh from a wounded bandage. I feel so calm, like it's easy to manage, but many will differ because they can't really stand it. If you're wondering why I'm so subtle during these casualties, it's because I'm used to calamities. It's part of my sanity. Let me picture you my fantasy. It's a painting of my reality. I contemplate and I concentrate. You tend to do that when there's a lot at stake. Coming from emptiness and a soul to hate, I couldn't be that lucky number 7 while it's section 8. We were trapped in a cage by fences. Well, that's how most hoods are if you see through clear lenses. Surrounded by outside barriers as if it's a watchtower, while community police had that sole power to protect and serve as their slogan. But the false advertisements would leave you broken. False promise that said in calmness does not become honest. Painting me a picture with fake polish as we work so hard with no profit. Only thing rising is your pocket, so stop it. We were raised in an asylum in tight spaces, non-private, in a building that has high mileage, expecting you raise your child in, as we accepted blinded, because if we speak out, we're wild, and so we tend to keep silent. How my life has been struck in by so-called policy, poverty have become the essence of my democracy, while options and opportunity depend on your community. My pathways were bleak with no sense of priority. But somewhere a pipeline is mentioned from school to prison as if it's a norm, from a detention to a detention. As sadness and grief surrounded my gaze with a shelter at home but no parents some days. Siblings to foster I never asked to raise while I sacrificed my hunger so they could be safe. I feel weak in class. I can't stay focused for long. My mind whirs and fragments is a replayed song. I may have ADHD. Is this how it feels? What the hell are we discussing? These people are weird. How can I sit here and focus? It's just not interesting. I have shit to deal with, man. Please wrap up this lesson. Some days we will talk about slavery or Vietnam or Japan, or how terrible Hitler was to set up his plan, while pointing out all the world's mistakes. Were the heroes here with some similar traits. And then it hit me after a second. Isn't it crazy how a complexion can choose the direction that you choose to step in? A mere vision of tint can change your mindset or cognitive thinking, I guess. Hypnotized to not realize that we're a mess, taught how to hate in a society that we do not address, because race is a topic that's so complex. But how can you ignore something that's so suppressed? Maybe it's because you're not the one that's being oppressed yet. See, I've seen different, a vision where lineage is stuck in a systematic prison, brainwashed into their predicament, where one can't control, one can't be held accountable. So how do we choose to live like you, change from black to blue or a few shades lighter too? My mindset are all the resources that are given to me, and at that age, nobody would listen to me, so I concentrate. A failure is what society illustrates as my fate. It's not about the choices we make, it's what's given on my plate. So while constantly being watched with no options to evolve, I see the chaos all around me, so I pause. I have thoughts that making it out must be the best escape, but an invisible chain that is instilled in my fate. My carceral humanism is a up state. But with wealth and plans, we must fluctuate, lead a positive trait to find a way out this empty space. My results of anger as they ridicule transforms to energy. Physical, not the arrogant results of commune, but the motive to build a stepping stool to return and give back what we once lacked. Educate and separate from what distracts at a common goal as our mind distracts, because only wolves are strongest while in a pack. So we're set in this movement of working together to better our circumstances here and forever. Well, not just for you, just for us, for our families too, loving brothers and sisters that look like you. I'm exhausted and tired of seeing those weary eyes that glistening in the light fades at that mother's smile as she has to bury her seed. It's pain to see her cry, and she asks God why. She's fragile inside, and here we are in this mortified human life, with corruption some are blinded by. Inequity has taken the power slide, but reality hit not for our normal mind. While we're in this predicament, let's remember to appreciate. Lots of things that we have taken for granted, like the structure and opportunity that you were handed, isn't the same for every child that has once been stranded, while the public eye has been blinded and vanished. Everyone was careless before COVID's transit, but now that we're all on the same planet, I hope you see it from our end and finally understand it. It's just like quarantine.
It's powerful, man. Give a couple snaps for that. Yeah, but the way you end it, man, that's really, like, I just think about the work that we're all doing to try to, like, humanize these issues that people are going through, and how you end the poem and talking about it's kind of like quarantine. Now do you understand it? And for anybody who's listening who hasn't experienced the system or incarceration or addiction or these traumatic cycles that so many people we're talking about have gone through, you know, listening to Ali's poem gives you a little glimpse into that isolation that you felt, and that disconnection that you felt, and that sometimes hopelessness that you felt. That's what we're talking about every day that people go through inside of these systems. And, you know, we say all the time that the opposite of addiction is connection. And that's true for when we're talking about reentry as well. Like, we have to, as human beings, connect to one another and thrive in spaces where we find community and all that. And so I just want to give a shout out to you for reading that poem and giving people a glimpse of, like, you know, even though you feel like it's so far removed from you, it's not as far removed as you think it is, because we've all been in that place of isolation and hopelessness, and that's what we're trying to shine a light on. So good for you for writing that poem, man, and coming out here and performing it. We appreciate that. I want to talk about main youth justice work. You know, let's talk about your trajectory coming into the advocacy space to, you know, advocate for the closure of Long Creek and the ending of youth incarceration in Maine. Tell the people a little bit about your story. I know you said that you've touched so many parts of the system, but, you know, give a little bit more context, whatever you're comfortable sharing. You know, what was your trajectory like from a young person experiencing incarceration for the first time through to this moment that you're at today, where, you know, you're a pretty significant high-level advocate in the state for a lot of different things.
Well, thank you for that. I think I would just pretty much start off with Jeremy was kind of bring it back to with Maine Inside Out, doing theater of the oppressed. How Brazil, I forgot the scholar that was teaching how the Brazilian the people that were incarcerated would do theater work to try to share their stories. And once we were able to do that, we started, you know, everything is about practice. Once we started to practice how to give glory to our stories, and people started to, like, receive that, like, whoa, you guys aren't criminals, you guys are not bad people, you guys were given, you know, difficult lives, right? And just like this door, right? Frank, thank you for having this door here. It's terrifying. It's trauma, right? You know, And just realizing like we didn't have it good in our childhood, right? And then you expect us to have the just like to be teenagers and go through regular schooling thereafter, getting incarcerated, and then just living your life right after. Like you never had a peaceful upbringing. You never had peace in your life at all, whether you're locked in, incarcerated, and being traumatized through the noises, through the like the doors, or through counts, like every time go inside for counts and things like that. Whether you're remembering your trauma, you have to literally be therapeutic for yourself. People trying to commit suicide in there, people being drugged, throughout your whole life, whether it's your family issues. It's literally chaos, right? If there's any type of social terrorization, it's through the life of someone that has to be incarcerated, especially at the young age. So following that, going into Maine Inside Out, I was working with them for 7 years. I mean, I didn't really have a position there. I did have it for a little bit, but I kind of gave it away because a lot of the other youth didn't have positions as well. So 7 years of it, we were just getting stipends, right? $50 stipends, $100 stipends, but I loved the work, right? And during that time, I still had to sell drugs, like to make it. I was working at the airport, and things like that. It's just like it's the reality that we had to live in. Just because we got out of jail doesn't mean that, you get a check. You know what I'm saying? You don't get nothing. So it's like, okay, wait, now I have to learn how to survive in social society, get my finances correct, get my education, deal with my trauma. I'm currently a criminal, right? I have a criminal record, probably 18, 19 years old, have to survive. Like it's literally limitless, of the issues. So 7 years of that, watching a lot of my friends, pass away, having to go to regular funerals, right? I've been to more funerals than I've been to weddings. I've been to more funerals than I've been to any major events that people go to. So what happens is it kind of gets to you, and after Maroon passed away from Lewiston, he passed away while he was the second level. Like he was like, I think it was like right behind me when it came to activism. He was like he was amazing, incredible, right? And every time I was in there, he would take my place, so there's certain times I couldn't be there. And after one day, he went home after a performance, and DHS took his children. He had two kids. After they took his children, he got really upset, and he went out and had a drink, as most people would, right, just to deal with that issue. But and then he mixed it with unfortunately, this is the story, that he mixed it with a substance, and that substance had fentanyl in it, and he was found on a chair right in front of his house. And after his wife came out and saw him, he was not responding. We had the funeral right after, and I remember burying his body, and Islamic, like we bury the body like with just a sheet into the dirt, right? So just holding his body and putting it inside really affected me, because this is a person that really, stood his ground and tried to build his community, was a good father. And that really just tore me up the most, because it was a lot. Thereafter, we started to like, no, we're not going to do this theater stuff anymore. We're not going to just tell the social order of our population, our people. We're going to come after the government. We have to. And that's what Maine Youth Justice really came out of. And Maine Youth Justice was the campaign that you're currently working with as a manager to shut down Long Creek. And we've done a lot of work. We've helped thousands of kids get diverted from being incarcerated. I remember there was about 200 plus kids that were incarcerated at one time when I was in there. Now there's like 22 at times, so 17 to 25 maximum. We've done a lot of work, and the kids that you got to understand, it's not only like 80 kids that got decreased. No, thousands of kids that would have went in there and came out and like were completely diverted. So it's a lot of progress. We're here now, and I think that we're going to keep going. It's been a decade, and that's where we're at.
And one of the foundations to Maine Youth Justice and the work that we're doing is really understanding that like there's a power to story, and it kind of in some ways parallels and draws on the work of people like Maine Inside Out, who are using the arts to compel young people to tell the story of their life and their story of incarceration and the trauma that they've endured and everything. To really open people's eyes, because one thing that we understand that we don't do enough is actually hear directly from the young people who are affected by incarceration about what their experience is, because we also understand that we don't empower them to tell that story, because we isolate them in the stories we tell about them in the narratives. And it's interesting, Jeremy, because when I think about what we've done and what we're trying to do with the podcast, is we're really trying to shine a spotlight on stories that go too often unheard in our society. And one thing we've done with the door that, you know, anybody listening hears us talk about kind of on repeat is like we took this door, Jeremy's old prison door, and repurposed it from this ugly, oppressive thing that it once was, and turned it into a piece of art and made it a conversation piece and something beautiful that we get to bring where we want to bring it, and we get to facilitate conversations about and around it that we want to. But what we're really trying to do with Maine Youth Justice is, like, you know, convince young people and give them the skills to tell their stories at a high level to actually affect the change that needs to happen, because people who make laws don't hear the stories of young people who are incarcerated. And, you know, for your experience, Jeremy, thinking about where you were at when you were 16 and 17 and experiencing youth incarceration and being bound over to this point that you're at now where, you know, you've got your door and you're doing this amazing community work. How important and how powerful for you is it for people to tell their stories and have platforms to do that?
The only way to create change, right? Like, if people don't know the real story about what's going on, you can't change the vote, right? You can't change how laws are made. You can't change, like, the stigma around what happens when somebody has to experience incarceration. We need storytelling to change, and it goes through from the beginning of time. We've been telling stories, you know. Mm-hmm. And that is really the only way, you know, that it happens. And I think the more stories are told, the more people are going to hear the stories, right? Yeah. And the right people starts to change their hearts. Yeah. It's the way it happens, you know what I mean? That's why I think, you know, Ali talked about progress. Like, I couldn't imagine a world, you know what I mean, where there's only 20. There's like you said, there's 22 kids in the Long Creek. It's a small number that I've never seen anything like it. Yeah, and it's like, and he said, like, one of the things I didn't think of when he said that is how many kids have been actually diverted. Yeah, from the work that they've been doing. You know what I mean? But that started with telling the story. More people go, okay, we can get involved. You know what I mean? And then we can empower other people to tell their stories, right? Like they say, I can do the same thing that he did. I can do the same thing that you did. You know what I mean? And I can get involved in this way. And maybe just my story is the way that I get involved, is just talk about what happened to me.
I mean, and that's the thing, like, to move legislators, lawmakers, and whatnot, I think that you have to use a different angles. So some people may be moved by stories and have a child that can relate to the individual that's speaking, right? And then some people may be moved by data. Some people may be moved by history and the reality of what created so many people to be incarcerated between the 80s up to the early 2000s, and what type of, you know, laws we had around redlining, and how the communities are, and how the infiltration of drugs and over-policing, what it caused, right? Mental health and everything like that, whether it's in GMO and foods that are actually making our bodies react a certain way. It's inflamed, whether it's like it's saying, oh, wait, we're actually wasting a lot of money by doing this. We can actually save a lot of money and increase how our financial upbringing of our state, right? Our financial state can actually increase by everybody's actually working and whatnot. And having, you know, positive lives. What negative you can't put something negative into a community and expect positive to come out. If you're constantly doing it, that's why we have, like, you know, it's pretty much tyranny. We have, like, it's terrible right now in our country, and we see what the results are, and the facts are there. And if we want to change anything about our country, then I think that we start at the worst predicaments that we currently have, which is incarceration.
And one of the things we have to do too is, like, we do have to celebrate the wins. And it's something that I think too often in like our roles doing this different social advocacy and social justice work, it's something that's really hard to do sometimes, is like actually celebrate the wins. And one of the wins is that, you know, in Maine, youth incarceration has been reduced drastically over the last 10 years, you know, hundreds and hundreds of percents. We've reduced the amount of youth who see the facility. But what we also see is how the system can adopt that same narrative to say we don't need to continue to change because look how far we've come and how good we've done. But the reality that we really want to shine a light on with Maine Youth Justice's work and a lot of other, you know, parallel organizations like Maine Inside Out, like Youth-Led Justice, and a lot of these other orgs are trying to do is really say that, no, it's great that we've come as far as we have, but that means that we have to keep going. And the reality that we want to talk about on this podcast is that it's not a healthy response to incarcerate any juvenile. And even though one of the problems with the way that stories works is that now that we only have 22 to 26 kids in the facility at any given time, what the narrative in society is that those kids are the worst of the worst, right? And if we're diverting hundreds of kids from youth incarceration, then that means the ones that we can't divert deserve to be there because they're a danger to our society. But the reality is, and we've heard from some people on the podcast, and we hear from people every day in the work that we do, is that no youth is actually truly bad, right? And that a lot of times the ones who are going in have the most needs, not the most, evil behaviors. They have a lot of needs, and prisons are not places to meet the needs of young people. And so from your perspective, Ali, just considering about what your time being incarcerated as a young man was like, and then hearing the thousands of stories you've heard over the last 10 years doing this work, what do you think people in society need to know about youth incarceration, even at the point it's at now where we've reduced the numbers?
I mean, I feel like, first off, kids that aren't incarcerated are geniuses, right? I wouldn't say, yeah, they do have needs that are not being met, whether it's housing, whether it's parenting, whether it's, protection from abuse, any type of abuse. It could be mental, emotional, physical, sexual. It could be any type of abuse, financial abuse, anything like that, right? And on top of that, just because these children cannot sit well in class and whatnot, I mean, you got to look at the curriculum. Curriculum hasn't changed in over 100 years. The world has changed, right? There's new innovation, there's new innovative technology, there's everything. Right? So we should be updated on how to actually live life better rather than being taught the exact same purview, especially in public schools and whatnot. So now you're boring the heck out of these kids after they get abused, after they don't know what's happening with their parents, after they have to worry about their siblings, after they have to worry about financial pieces, like barely getting any sleep, taking care of, probably eating noodles and McChickens and whatever, and they don't even have the nutrients in their body, and then you're going to punish them because they can't sit in class, right? So it's just like, it's like lose-lose. And the point is, like, and on top of that, our history books it's filled up with like aggression, right? It's not looking at it like, even if you go to Germany, they actually feel bad about what they've done in throughout the world. It's like our history books, they don't feel bad. They actually just say, this is liberty. This is amazing. This is like, what's amazing about it? What do we do to the natives? What do we do to the Africans that were enslaved? What do we do to Vietnam at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? What do we do to, like, what do we do? look at the Arabian Peninsula, right? What do we in reality? What do we do, right? And talking about look at the harm that we actually have caused, right? Look what do we do to our food systems, right? What do we do to separate the communities? Like, if you're never going to speak in reality of the harm, then look at a child like this child has been harmed, and then at the age of 14, 15 years old, lock them up because they're not listening in class and they're reacting to the abuse that they're even receiving, whether they're in class, from the biases that are coming from the teachers. And first off, this is unethical. It's, what I'm saying? It's all of that is messed up. So when I noticed is when I got incarcerated was how genius when these children were, right? And because they don't want to live in the reality that we're currently living in, it's subjugated to live it. You know what I'm saying? They want to live in a good life. And to do that, they'll fight through it. And that's what it is. And sometimes they don't have the ability to explain the emotional dissonance that they have with other people. You know what I'm saying? So it's when understanding them and then giving them the tools to, because if I'm literally yelled at for all the things that I'm doing wrong, I'm going to yell back. If I'm hit, I'm going to hit. This is my react learned behavior, psychological. Right? So if that's your subconscious, if they're given the tools to actually create something beautiful, if they're treated well, then that's what's going to happen, right? So that's why I say, when now the government and the systems are coming after these kids, but this is the result of the government and systems that created these type of families, right? That creating these type of communities. So we're just like, we're going to give you negative. Years later, we're going to lock up your kid because they're acting negative.
Yeah, you only use the tools that you've been given, right? So especially as a young person, the idea of creating a new tool that's the complete opposite of what you've been taught is not really something that most people are thinking about, most young people are thinking about. So like you said, if I've been yelled at and beaten my whole life, then I'm going to probably yell at and beat people when I don't get the desired outcome from them that I want. And then I'm going to be punished for it. And so I'm going to internalize that punishment. My resentment's going to grow, and all those things are true. And it's interesting because I hear you talking a lot about like the thing that we never bring into the conversation about juvenile justice in terms of when we talk about it in our communities, which is this idea that like young people that have experienced abject poverty, young people that have been exposed to prejudice and racism, young people who have been, experienced homelessness and have, experienced foodlessness and have been hungry and starving, young people that have faced all of these obstacles that they never chose. This wasn't something that they ever said, I want to be homeless and I want to grow up in a household that normalizes substance use and start using substances from a young age when my brain is not fully developed. Like, these aren't conversations that young people are having with themselves or others. They're not choices that they're making. And so that's something that we really have to generate the conversation in society about, is we have to treat young people with the opposite of what they've experienced. So where they've experienced a lack of community, we have to give them community. Where they've experienced abuse, we have to flood them with love. Where they've experienced normalized substance use to mask their issues, we have to give them recovery. And the one thing that I feel that I feel like I know this to be true in the work that I do and in the stories that we've exchanged, Jeremy, and the stories of the thousands of youth that we've encountered, is that we don't do that when we put them in prison. When we put them in prison, we introduce them to the same things that they've been suffering from, or worse. Yeah.
And this is one thing I talk about. I'm like, look, listen, average person, the person that's listening to this podcast right now, go to your room and close the door, right? And have someone just deliver your food to you for 24 hours. Leave your phone out there. You don't have no phone, and wear the same clothes. Do it for 48. Do it for 72. Close yourself in a car. That level of claustrophobia inside of a cell, inside of whatever it is, 8 by 10, whatever it is, a cell that a child is feeling they can't get out. Think of how much trauma you can't even commit suicide if you wanted to. You can't even do that, right? Because I want to end my life because I can't take it. You can't. So it's literally torturing the mind of that child. Think about the claustrophobia level, right? Of how much you fuck, I can't get out. So they just wrap themselves up in a blanket, and they literally can't sleep because out of fear. Right? So this constant traumatization, and we're wondering what's happening.
What do you think people in society who, when you say we need to close youth prisons, they think that doing that will make our communities dangerous, and that will just have this huge problem of horrible kids running around committing crimes with no place to keep society safe. What is your response to them? What do you tell them?
There's so many different responses. There's so many different solutions. The first thing is really rebuilding communities, right? Giving the inside of communities. If you look at all major low-income communities, they're usually right next to the courthouse, right? And right next to that is a highway that divides the middle-class area to the low-class area. And this was created by redlining, right? And if you go to any major city, you'll see it. Any major city, and in the whole country, it was literally created like this between the 1920s all the way to the 1980s, and then they implemented the next plan, whatever. I mean, I'm gonna say they. That's the solution, is to give back the recreational things that the kids can use to actually be innovative and whatnot. Give mental health services, give family services, diapers, for example. Have a community giveaway play area, right? If we invested in that. Number two, another thing is, if you're looking at safety of communities right now, we have the highest incarceration rate in the world, right? We have the highest levels of laws. We have the highest level. How much safer can we get? We have school shootings. We have mental health and serious mental health. We have disease infiltration. We have everything bad. Even in the health industries, we are number one worst when it comes to health. We think we're actually the best. We're actually the worst when it comes to health, right? And you can look this up on Google. So if we're looking, how are we going to get these kids out? Kids are going to be kids. It's about how they're raised. Today I'm speaking English. I'm an Ethiopian man, right? I'm speaking English because I was learning. So if I literally learn it, it's going to subconsciously be into my mind. So if you're teaching positive reinforcements to the children, they're going to become more positive. And we're not going to act like children are not ballistic. Anybody who has children, you know how bad your toddler is going to be. You know what I'm saying? This is what the reality is. But it's our responsibility to step into that and rebuild the positive generation that can happen, right? And a lot of us that have been incarcerated, we know this. We have to give it back, because now we know, right? And it's the same thing. If we continue that cycle, the percentages of harm and crime and everything would drop drastically, And
Jeremy, how do you respond to that? Because what I hear Ali saying is an alternate to youth incarceration is to basically use all the resources we dump into youth incarceration to create resources that actually build up community instead of isolating people from it. And to me, that sounds like a recovery model, right? That sounds like a model that that you're talking about with Recovery Connections of Maine for people in recovery from substance use and people in reentry from adult incarceration. So when you hear him say that the remedy for a lot of the problems that our youth are facing is like healthier communities and more resources, isn't that kind of the same of what you're talking about in the work that you're doing as well?
Money is not an issue in our country either. Like how we spend that money is the issue, right? Like what he's talking about is reinvesting in our communities, right? Like not incarcerating. We're putting the money towards like things that make sense to the community, right? Like the things that are going to rebuild the community, heal the community. 100% agree. Yeah, I think it's like going. That's if people get out of incarceration and go back into the same chaos that they came out of, like you said, he gets out, he's trying to do the right thing. He's still in a situation where he has to struggle to survive. That is like, we stack it up on people, and then think that it's going to change. They go back to the same neighborhood, so it has to start in the neighborhood. There has to be. I think, like, you put a kid in, let's just say Lewiston High School right here, a kid that lives on Walnut Street as a kid that lives out on Pond Road in the same city, and there's like definitive differences of how, and maybe how these kids are gonna, if they're gonna be successful.
If we look at suburban communities, they have like the highest rate of positive results, but they have a lot of the same issues. They just don't get incarcerated for it. They don't get incarcerated for it because they right. So they go into rehabs, or they go into like anything positive. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's counseling, whether it's getting a mentor, whether it's going to a program. They have options and opportunities. Their schools are different. Their schools teach different stuff. They teach you how to win. Right. So and you're talking about the same level of children being raised the same. And then a lot of these kids go to jail. A lot of these kids don't. So all we have to do is imitate what we did in the suburban communities and our own urban communities, right? In the low income type of communities, and get the same result. Like, this is data that's proven. Like, anybody can search this up. You know what I'm saying?
And one thing we know from talking to young people is that, like, if we know that resources are the answer in a lot of these scenarios where young people are coming from communities where they don't have the resources to grow and thrive and do everything they need to do to be on whatever we call like the right path, and then we incarcerate them and we say that, oh, we're giving them all these resources, but then we let them out without the resources, because that's a universal story we hear from young people coming home is like, I got out to the same exact thing that was there when I went in. I didn't have a community. I didn't have a network. And so I went back to the same things that I know. And so if it comes down to resources, and it is really about talking honestly about how do we create resources for people who don't have them, who are misbehaving or who are experiencing, crisis in a way that other kids with resources aren't. And so, like, you're right. We have to replicate, healthy community. We have to replicate positive resources. We have to replicate different things that exist in communities where young people don't go to prison, instead of demonizing the communities and saying, oh, these communities are producing bad kids, when in reality what we've done is produced a world where resources aren't handed out equitably, right? And so it's also not lost on us who do this work that even in Maine, the second widest state in the country, the numbers of young people who experience incarceration are extremely disproportionate for young Black kids and young brown kids. So it's wild that we have all this information, we have all these realities right in front of our very eyes, but we've been so conditioned to the narrative of bad kids that we turn a blind eye to it. We don't want to believe that these kids aren't bad, our systems are bad. Right. And so what we believe in the world of recovery, in the world of reentry, in the world of juvenile justice, a lot of these things are aligned. What we believe is that we need more resources, we need more community, we need more care. We need to actually care what people go through and show up to help them heal from their traumas and give them the resources to actually do something positive once they've started that healing journey. And for you, who are really uniquely positioned to talk about this, because you do come from an immigrant community, you are a black man in the second whitest state. You did experience youth incarceration and adult incarceration, and you do a ton of advocacy work around like equity and prejudice and racism and all these things that exist and what we need. And so, what can you tell the average Maine citizen about your experience as a young immigrant black man encountering these systems and how that shaped, your life beyond the walls? Because it's not like you came out of Long Creek and figured it out right away.
Oh, no.
Right?
No. I mean, I think it's not only my experience, it's experiencing other people's lives as well. Like watching what's happening in their lives, the people that I'm working with, whether it's in the community, whether it's children, whether it's people that are currently incarcerated that I've known have been incarcerated for 10 years or more, that are in the adult system, whether it's people that have been deported, whether it's people that's died, or whether people that had relocated from the state and tried to live a better life, right? And some of them got lucky, went to college, but not a big percentage of them, right? What I think is this: I don't see the negative side of taking the money that we're literally pouring into juvenile justice services. Right now, $18 million goes through the building, like $18.7 million roughly. But there's over, I think maybe $60 to $100 million that's literally going to juvenile justice services in general, whether it's sheriffs, whether it's court fees, whether it's the traveling, whether it's all these different things, right? We have to understand there's so much money that's going into that. If you've invested that money that we're constantly paying every single year from our taxes back into communities, that could create some type of purview for every individual. If resources are recreated, so if a kid works to do lawn mowing, right? He makes $20-$30, and now the father or whoever or the other kid, they don't have to do the lawn mowing, which means that they have more time to do other work. So it's a constant currency increase. So what actually happens is after 2 to 3 years, you see the progress, right, of more communities actually moving like suburban communities where they start to grow, where people can start to purchase homes, purchase vehicles, and now when you have value, you don't want to lose it. So you have way too much to lose. I got way too much to lose. I can't be doing things. When you have value, you're actually decreasing the amount of the chances that you're going to commit crime, nor your fellow members and everything like that. And after just a few years of this investment, we can decrease the amount of money that has to be invested in these type of communities. Now everybody's making their own money, and that helps our whole economy, right? The state of Maine economy. Now we can have better tourism. We have less police officer going into communities. We have less correction officer having to do that work out inside, rather do the work out here, rather do the work in transition to identify how can I help the communities out here, if that's what you love to do. Or you can choose a different industry if you're tired of that type of work. So it's only a positive. And this is just a reality of it, and it's been proven time and time again. This is happening all over the country. Even last presidential election, they were talking about criminal justice reform. Why? Because this is obviously the truth, right? And there's a lot of countries that if we're number one when it comes to finances, if we're number one in a lot of things, but there's a lot of countries that's doing way better than us in the treatment of their people, way better than us, happier, right? Because the ability of actually living a good life.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is like reinvestment. That's one of the things we fight for with Maine Youth Justice at a really high level, is like we have this tens of millions of dollars that we could reinvest into our communities to give young people the opportunity to thrive and grow, instead of spending those tens of millions of dollars to isolate and traumatize them inside of a prison environment where they can't grow, right? No matter how high level the services that you provide a young person inside of a prison are, the likeliness of them actually growing and thriving beyond that because of the trauma that you're putting them through as well, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to latch onto those things if they're coming home to the same exact things that were there when they went in. So reinvesting some of that money into communities to give young people and their families and their communities the opportunity to learn and thrive and have the skills to, generate their own incomes and find a way to build wealth and keep wealth and invest their own money seems like a much more likely to succeed long-term plan. And obviously I couldn't agree with you more that it's not just about showing up and caring for these kids. I think that's the foundation, but it's also about evaluating our systems to say, where are we using our resources with no return on investment? Right? And where can we actually shift those resources to get a great return on investment? But I think there's another layer of it too. And Jeremy, I'm interested for you, like, This is like a really basic question. If you saw a young person out here, if you were walking to your truck after we're doing this, and you saw a young person who's obviously struggling, what would you do?
And just ask them what's going on. You know what I mean? How can I help you?
Holy shit. That's wild to hear somebody say that. And why would you do that?
Because we care about people. You know what I mean?
But what if there's 30 kids? Can you help all of them at one time? So what do you usually do? You have to be like, damn, I can't help them all. I got to keep going. That's the problem, right? So, but if we decrease, if I see one kid, I'm going to help them. If I see two, I'll help.
But you are, and Jeremy is, and I am. The problem I think that we need to really get to, one of the root causes, is that the majority of people in our society are going to see that troubled young person, and what are they going to do? They're going to walk away. And they're going to walk away with this story of like, it's a bad kid getting in trouble. I don't want my kids around.
And that's a perspective. That's a perspective. What I'm thinking is, what we want is the mass investment. We need a complete switch of trajectory, because it's not going to get any better. This is going to go into turmoil. And we see how our society is actually currently failing, right? Especially after COVID, after all these things, it's actually starting to fail. Like mental health is at its all-time high.
So really the question is, how do you get a mass number of constituents, right?
Yeah.
To lobby the person, their legislators to shift money into what we're talking about here, right? Because that's really the issue, right? Is that like there is the reason we got here is because we're programmed to have some indifference in what happens to like it's like you're a bad kid. Stay away from my kid, right? Like we segregate problems in our society, right? We push them over here, and you go to a high school football game and no one's thinking about the kid that's you know what I mean, like living under the bleachers. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's so much going on that we are programmed not to look at. That how do you get this idea of reinvestment into a community when there's so much cognitive dissonance going on? Like you think about, like, there's billions of dollars in professional sports that are going on. I just seen a baseball player got signed for $1 billion over so much time. You know what I mean? It's like our society,
What we value.
things that are not taking care of the 30 kids that are struggling with it. You know what I mean? It's really like, how do you change people's minds? How do you pull people out of that so that they actually care about the neighbor's kid down the street, not just what's going on in my roof? You know what I mean?
But then you got to look at the housing issue, right? There's not enough houses for individuals they're in the state of Maine, but it's like, if we did the investment, people could buy their own houses. You know how much land is untouched? You know how much land is literally untouched that you can purchase and you can start to build your own home? Like, there's so much opportunity. Resources are endless. And the fact that we just look at what's happening in this small amount of money, this little $18 million or this little $50 million per year, if you did this for 4 years, you would see a huge change in the state of Maine.
But there's a piece before that too, though, right? Isn't there? Like, so what I'm thinking about, and what we constantly talk about, the value of storytelling and like enabling and empowering young people to tell their stories, is because, like, when I think about Jeremy's response, like, I'm going to ask that kid what's going on. And I think about so many other people in society who just will see that young person who's down and out or maybe acting up, and they'll attach a narrative to that kid that's been conditioned into them, like, oh, bad kid, stay away. Right? But the power is also when you ask a young person who's struggling, what's up, you might be fucking blown away when you hear the story of that young person. You might walk away going, holy shit, I can't believe this 14-year-old has been through the things that this kid just told me he's been through. I need to help him or her, or we need to help him or her. And then maybe, I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, is how do we convince our listeners and people in society to, instead of just turning a blind eye and subscribing to that narrative of like, oh, that kid's bad, like, how do we show up for young people in our community as a first step to then get to the reinvestment? Because that part's going to take time.
Well, that's you just said it, community, right? We don't have community. We really don't. We were taught to isolate ourselves in and in the state of America, as in like the present state, right? If you look at different countries, they have communities, they have groups, they have, like literally, you probably don't, I don't even know my neighbors, to be honest. I got to know one of them. I kind of talk to them here and there, but I don't even have 4 different neighbors. I don't know them, right? So to create a community, but that's how we're taught. We're conditioned to be isolated. We're conditioned to break up families. We're conditioned to not love each other, not care about each other. And by doing that, once you have 100 people that actually know each other, 1,000 people within your community that actually know each other, or that person and still that person, then you could actually come to a common understanding. That kid needs help. Now, 5 kids need help. There's 1,000 people. That's more than enough. I can help once a month. Once a month, I'll make dinner for him. Cool. You know what I'm saying? So there's a pot. That's what it is. It's community.
And so maybe that's where the reinvestment needs to start. And I think that is one of the things we talk about with Maine Youth Justice, is that the reinvestment needs to start in building some community for these young people who don't have it right now. And feasibly, we can't return them to the brokenness that they're coming from. And the alternative shouldn't be incarceration. It should be finding communities and networks to plug them into, full of people who actually encourage them to grow and thrive and use their unique talents and knowledge to create a future for themselves that is limitless, as opposed to one that is extremely limited by the narrative of incarceration and criminality. And that's, I think we're getting to kind of the meat of one of the problems here, is like, it takes all of this work, and that's all work we have to invest in. But maybe instead of spending $18 million to incarcerate young people in Maine every year, we spend $18 million to build community alternatives for them, so that when they're struggling, they actually know, I have a place I can go and be myself and get the tools and get the community and the love that I need in order to thrive. And I think that's important for people to consider. And I think, as we bring this episode to a close, I want to give you an opportunity, Ali, real quick, to let the people know about what is the work of Maine Youth Justice right now. How can they support? How can they get down and help the effort to end youth incarceration and actually give our young people a chance to thrive, as opposed to re-traumatizing them through more broken interactions with broken systems?
Yeah, I mean, to connect it all, one of the biggest things you said was community, right? And obviously, we can't build community without just resources, right? You can't just have, like, we see the rundown communities that a lot of us grew up in, and going back to it, it's like, when kids are bored, they're gonna do some fun stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I think that the investment piece has to be aligned with the community piece. And right now we have our bill LD 1779, and we have a follow-up bill that we're hoping to get in as LD 288. It's sponsored by Representative Grayson Lookner, and co-sponsored by Rachel Talbot Ross, which is the Speaker of the House. This is following our bill from LD 1668 2 years ago that passed the whole legislature and was vetoed by the governor, stating that it was fundamentally flawed. So now what we have is the 2 bills, and we're hoping to create a huge diversion of kids that could have been incarcerated, whether any type of interactions with police, to identify what their needs are, to run an assessment need, and then after that, trying to see what type of programs we can run them, take them to, or any if they're houseless, and try to see what possibilities there are in getting them housed, whether they need food or anything like that. So that's like a big purview of it. And then we're hoping to create a committee in the state legislature and the government to identify how we're going to create this plan to invest all the money back into communities and community-based programs. And like we said, $300,000 a year to incarcerate one child, that's college money. You know what I'm saying? Like, 4 years in college, but you know what I'm saying? So it's just, the possibilities are endless. And I think that as long as, people that are in their communities, right, in their respected counties, please contact your local legislator and tell them that to pass LD 1779 as well as LD 288. And please just follow up with them on any juvenile justice services to make sure that we get the reinvestments that we need in our community. It's just going to be positive for you, positive for us, positive for everyone in the state of Maine. So y'all know what it is.
Absolutely. And I'll just end by saying, if you're in Maine, please take Ali's advice. Call your local representative to the Maine Senate or the Maine House of Representatives, and just tell them simply, we need to end youth incarceration in the state of Maine. They'll know what bills are aimed at doing that. If you're in Maine and we have a new governor's race coming up, because you just heard from Ali that our bill 2 years ago passed the House, passed the Senate, and was shot down by our governor, So ask people running for governor, ask people running for office what their stance on youth incarceration is. Make people make statements on the record about why we would put a 15-year-old inside of a cage and expect them to heal. And also, if you're not from Maine and you're interested in this, find your local organizations, connect with them, find the people who are trying to end youth incarceration and create supportive services for young people, and help them with resources, whatever you have. If you have $1 to donate it. Look up Maine Youth Justice and the work that's happening in Maine right now. Get with the cause, show up at the events, donate money if you can. And most importantly, have conversations with people in your community about what young people need, and ask questions and listen to young people when they speak. That's the way that we actually create a community in a world where young people are thriving. Just want to say thanks for listening into another episode of Behind the Door. These topics are super important to us. Big shout out to you, Ali, for doing the work that you're doing. Big shout out to Jeremy, always, for holding down the podcast and the amazing work that he's doing in the community. And thank you guys for listening to another episode. Keep tuning in, share, download, spread the word. Behind the Door, try to tell these stories and make a difference in our community. So thank you, everybody.